The morning started like any other Tuesday at the downtown courthouse, with lawyers rushing through security, defendants nervously checking their phones, and the usual bustle of people trying to navigate the confusing hallways. But what was about to happen in the next few minutes would become the talk of the entire building for months to come. A woman walked through the main entrance just after 8:30 in the morning. She looked tired, really tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her blazer had a coffee stain on the sleeve that she hadn't noticed yet. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of someone who hadn't slept properly in days, maybe weeks. She carried an old leather briefcase that had seen better days, and her shoes were the comfortable kind that people wear when they've been on their feet for too long. To anyone watching, she looked like just another person dealing with the stress of a court case. Maybe a defendant, maybe a witness, maybe just someone who had drawn the short straw and had to show up for jury duty. Nothing about her screamed authority or importance. She was just another face in the crowd trying to get through another difficult day. But here's where things get interesting. Instead of joining the long line at the metal detectors like everyone else, she walked right past it. She headed straight for a hallway marked with a sign that clearly said, "Authorized personnel only." Her mind was somewhere else entirely, running through details of cases and paperwork and 100 other things that needed her attention. A young security officer spotted her immediately. His name was Derek, and he'd only been working at the courthouse for about 3 weeks. Fresh out of training, he was eager to prove himself, maybe a little too eager. He had that new job energy where everything feels like a test, and he was determined to pass every single one. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice sharp and official. "Ma'am, stop right there." The woman didn't stop. She didn't even seem to hear him. Her mind was clearly miles away, focused on whatever problems she was trying to solve in her head. We've all been there, right? When you're so deep in thought that the world around you just fades into background noise. Derek felt a flash of irritation. He called out again, louder this time. "Ma'am, you need to stop." When she still didn't respond, something shifted in him. His face started to redden and he jogged after her, his hand moving to rest on his belt in that universal gesture of authority that security personnel use when they want you to know they mean business. He caught up to her quickly and grabbed her arm, not gently. "Are you deaf?" he said, his voice rising.
"This area is off limits to the public."
"You can't just walk wherever you want." The woman turned then, startled out of her thoughts. She looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. Not angry exactly, not scared either, just tired. So incredibly tired. She opened her mouth to speak, probably to explain, but Derek was already on a roll. "I don't care who you think you are," he continued, his voice getting louder with each word. "You can't just waltz into restricted areas. Do you see that sign? Can you read?" Now here's where it gets really uncomfortable. People were starting to notice. A couple of lawyers in expensive suits paused their conversation to watch. A woman with a clipboard stopped mid-step. A maintenance worker carrying a ladder slowed down to see what was happening. Within seconds, a small crowd was forming, drawn by the raised voice and the obvious tension. The woman took a breath and tried again. "If you would just let me explain." "Explain? Explain what?" Derek cut her off. "That you thought the rules don't apply to you? That you're special? I hear that excuse 10 times a day, lady." By now, at least 15 people were watching. Some looked concerned, others curious, and a few seemed amused by the drama unfolding in front of them. The marble hallway made Derek's voice echo, ensuring that even people who weren't directly watching could hear every word. A courthouse bailiff who had been checking his phone nearby looked up and started walking toward them. This bailiff, an older man who'd worked in the building for years, took one look at the woman and his eyes went wide. He picked up his pace. "Officer," the bailiff said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Maybe we should—" "Stay out of this," Derek snapped, not even looking at him. "I've got this under control. This woman is trespassing in a restricted area, and she needs to be escorted out." The woman still hadn't raised her voice. She just stood there, letting Derek continue his tirade, her expression calm despite the humiliating situation. If anything, she looked like someone who had dealt with difficult people before and knew that sometimes the best response was no response at all. "You people think you can talk your way out of anything," Derek said, and there was something in the way he said "you people" that made several onlookers shift uncomfortably. It was one of those phrases that can mean different things depending on how you say it, and the way Derek said it didn't sit right with anyone listening. The older bailiff tried again, more urgently this time. Listen, I really think you need to. Are you going to do your job, or do I need to call for backup? Derek turned on him now, his frustration finding a new target, because it seems like you're more interested in protecting rule breakers than enforcing courthouse security. The woman glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 8:55. She seemed to be calculating something in her head, then looked back at Derek with an expression that might have been patience, or might have been something else entirely, something that suggested she knew exactly how this was going to play out, and she was simply letting it happen. More people were gathering now. The hallway was getting crowded. Someone whispered to their companion. Someone else pulled out their phone, though whether to check the time or record the incident wasn't clear. The energy in the space had shifted from curious to tense. Everyone could feel that something was building, though nobody quite knew what. Derek still had hold of the woman's arm. "I'm giving you one last chance to cooperate," he said. "Either you come with me quietly to explain yourself to my supervisor, or I'm going to have to take more serious action." "Your choice." The woman didn't look scared. She didn't look angry. She just looked at Derek with those tired eyes, like she was memorizing his face, like she was taking mental notes of everything he was saying and how he was saying it. It was the kind of look that should have warned him something was off. But Derek was too far into his performance to notice. The older bailiff had his head in his hands now, looking like a man watching a car crash in slow motion, powerless to stop it. And then, cutting through the tension like a knife, came the clicking sound of heels on marble, rapid and purposeful. Someone was running down the hallway and they sounded urgent. The crowd parted slightly, and everyone turned to see who was coming. Everything was about to change. A woman in her 50s came rushing down the hallway, her face flushed from hurrying. She was carrying a stack of folders, and looked like she was already running late for something important. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on the tired woman still being held by Derek's firm grip. "Oh, thank goodness," the older woman said, slightly out of breath. "I've been looking everywhere for you. We really need to—" She stopped mid-sentence as she finally registered what was happening. Her gaze moved from Derek's hand on the woman's arm, to the crowd of onlookers, to the red-faced young officer who suddenly looked very confused. "Is there a problem here?" she asked slowly, her tone shifting from relieved to concerned. Derek squared his shoulders, trying to maintain his authority in front of yet another person questioning his judgment. "Ma'am, I'm handling a security situation. This woman was attempting to access a restricted area without proper authorization. If you know her, I'll need to see your credentials as well." The older woman blinked at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. She looked at the tired woman, then back at Derek, then at the bailiff who was now covering his face with both hands. "Officer," she said carefully, "do you know who this is?" "I don't care if she's the mayor's sister," Derek shot back. "Rules are rules, and she broke them. Nobody gets special treatment in this courthouse." You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from everyone watching. A few people in the crowd exchanged glances that clearly said, "Oh no, this is bad." One lawyer actually took a step backward, like he didn't want to be associated with what was about to happen. The older bailiff finally stepped forward again, his voice urgent. "Derek, please, just listen for 1 second. "No, you listen," Derek interrupted, his voice rising again. "I've been patient. I've been professional. But everyone here seems more interested in making excuses for someone who clearly thinks she's above the law than in supporting courthouse security. What kind of message does that send?" The woman with the folders looked like she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She glanced at her watch and winced. "We really don't have time for this. Your 9 o'clock calendar is packed and the attorneys are already waiting in." She caught herself, but it was too late. Derek's grip on the tired woman's arm loosened slightly. 9 o'clock calendar? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you're currently detaining—" the older woman started, but the tired woman finally spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. "It's all right, Patricia. Let him finish." Something about the way she said it made everyone go quiet. It wasn't a command exactly. It wasn't even particularly stern. But there was a weight to her words that made even Derek pause. It was the voice of someone used to being listened to, someone who didn't need to raise their voice to be heard. Patricia, as she'd been called, looked frustrated but nodded. "As you wish. But we really are going to be late." Derek's certainty was starting to crack. He could feel it, that sinking sensation when you realize you might have made a mistake. But you're too far in to back out gracefully. "Late for what?" he asked, and for the first time his voice had a hint of uncertainty in it. That's not your concern right now, the tired woman said calmly. You were explaining why you grabbed my arm and publicly accused me of criminal trespassing. Please continue. The way she phrased it sent a chill through the hallway. Several people in the crowd were now recording on their phones, which definitely wasn't helping Derek's situation. A young lawyer nudged his colleague and whispered, "Is that who I think it is?" I was doing my job, Derek said, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. You didn't stop when I called you. You were heading into a restricted area. I had every right to detain you for questioning. Did you ask to see identification? The woman asked. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. You didn't give me a chance. You ignored me. I was preoccupied, she admitted. It's been a long few weeks. But when you grabbed my arm, did you ask for identification then? Or did you immediately begin accusing me? The bailiff made a sound that might have been a groan. Patricia was checking her watch again, looking increasingly anxious. The crowd was dead silent now, hanging on every word. Look, you were clearly trying to get away, Derek said, his face now less angry and more defensive. People who have nothing to hide don't ignore security officers. Or, the woman said gently, people who work in this building every day might be distracted by their caseload and not register that someone is calling out to them. Did that possibility occur to you? Derek's face went pale. Work in this building? You work here? That's what I've been trying to tell you, the older bailiff said quietly. Patricia jumped in, unable to hold back any longer. Officer, you've been here 3 weeks. This is Judge Victoria Chen. She's been on special assignment for the past month, which is why you haven't met her yet. And she's supposed to be in her courtroom in exactly 4 minutes to hear arguments on a very important case. The word judge hit Derek like a physical blow. All the color that had drained from his face now rushed back in a deep crimson flush. His hand released the judge's arm immediately, and he took a stumbling step backward. Judge? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd erupted in a mix of gasps, nervous laughter, and whispered commentary. The lawyer who had been recording quickly stopped and put his phone away, suddenly very interested in looking anywhere but at the unfolding scene. Judge Chen straightened her blazer and picked up her briefcase, which had fallen during the initial confrontation. She didn't look angry, which somehow made the situation even worse for Derek. If she'd yelled or threatened him, at least he'd know where he stood. But her calm composure was terrifying in its own way. Officer Derek Thompson, she said, reading his name tag for the first time. I appreciate that you take security seriously. That's an admirable quality in your position. Derek looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Your Honor, I didn't. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. She held up a hand, gently stopping his stammering apology. We'll discuss this later. Right now, I have a courtroom full of people waiting for me, and I'm already late because of this situation. I'll write a full report, Derek said quickly. I'll explain everything to my supervisor. You'll report to Chief Bailiff Rodriguez's office during the lunch recess, Judge Chen interrupted. Her tone still calm, but leaving no room for argument. 12:30. Don't be late. Yes, Your Honor. Absolutely, Your Honor. The crowd was already dispersing, people scattering like they didn't want to be associated with what they'd just witnessed. Patricia was making urgent, we need to go now gestures. The older bailiff patted Derek on the shoulder sympathetically as he walked away, shaking his head. Judge Chen started walking toward the restricted hallway, the same one Derek had prevented her from entering just minutes ago. She paused and looked back at him. Officer Thompson, I suggest you spend the next few hours thinking very carefully about what happened here this morning. About assumptions. About respect. About the difference between authority and bullying. We'll talk at 12:30. And with that she walked away, Patricia hurrying beside her, already briefing her on the morning's cases. Derek stood frozen in the hallway, surrounded by the wreckage of his reputation, watched by the few remaining onlookers who were probably already spreading the story throughout the building. One thing was certain. This was going to be the longest morning of Derek Thompson's entire life. And the worst part? He still had to face her again in just a few hours. The clock on the wall ticked toward 9. In courtroom 3, Judge Victoria Chen was about to take her seat behind the bench. And somewhere in that same building, Officer Derek Thompson was having a very serious conversation with himself about the career choice he'd made 3 weeks ago. Judge Victoria Chen walked into courtroom 3 at exactly 9:02. 2 minutes late might not sound like much, but in the world of courthouse proceedings, where schedules are packed tighter than a subway car at rush hour, those 2 minutes felt significant. She took a moment in her chambers to compose herself, fix her hair properly, and put on her black judicial robe. When she looked in the mirror, the tired woman from the hallway was gone, replaced by the image of authority and justice that people expected to see. The bailiff's voice rang out as she entered. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Victoria Chen presiding. Everyone in the courtroom stood up in unison, that familiar shuffle of feet and rustle of clothing that happens dozens of times a day in courtrooms across the country. But today there was something different in the air. Several of the attorneys who had witnessed the hallway incident were trying their best to keep their faces neutral, but their eyes gave them away. Some looked sympathetic, others curious about what might happen next, and a few seemed almost excited, like they were waiting for some kind of dramatic showdown. As everyone sat down, Judge Chen noticed a figure standing at the very back of the courtroom, partially hidden behind the last row of benches. Officer Derek Thompson. His face was still flushed, and even from the bench she could see that his hands were trembling slightly. He looked like a man standing before a firing squad waiting for the inevitable. Judge Chen didn't acknowledge him. Not yet. Instead, she turned her attention to the clerk and nodded. "Let's proceed with this morning's calendar." What happened next surprised everyone who had been expecting fireworks. Judge Chen was completely normal, professional, fair, thorough. She heard the first case, a motion to suppress evidence in a theft case, and listened carefully to both attorneys. She asked pointed questions, referenced case law from memory, and made notes on her legal pad. When she ruled denying the motion, she explained her reasoning, clearly so that everyone in the courtroom understood exactly why she'd made that decision. The second case involved a young man appearing in court for the first time on a minor drug possession charge. He was clearly terrified, stumbling over his words when asked to confirm his name. Judge Chen's voice softened noticeably. "Take your breath," she told him. "I know this is scary. Just answer the questions truthfully and we'll get through this together." The young man's lawyer looked relieved. The public defender whispered something to her client, who nodded and managed to get through his arraignment without falling apart. Judge Chen set reasonable bail and reminded the young man that showing up for his court dates was the most important thing he could do right now. The third case was more contentious. Two experienced attorneys were locked in a heated dispute over discovery materials, and their argument was getting increasingly personal. One attorney accused the other of deliberately withholding evidence. The other attorney shot back that the first one was incompetent and hadn't filed the proper requests. "Gentlemen," Judge Chen's voice cut through their bickering like a knife, "this is my courtroom, not a playground. You will address your arguments to me, not to each other. You will show respect to opposing counsel, or you will find yourselves explaining your behavior to the state bar. Am I clear?" Both attorneys immediately straightened up. "Yes, Your Honor," they said in unison, suddenly remembering that they were supposed to be professionals. Judge Chen made them start over, this time presenting their arguments properly. She asked questions, examined the documents in question, and then made a ruling that gave each side part of what they wanted while making it clear that she wouldn't tolerate their behavior if it continued. Both attorneys left looking chastened but satisfied that they'd at least gotten a fair hearing. During a brief recess between cases, two attorneys were standing near the bench, speaking in low voices. They didn't realize how well sound carried in the quiet courtroom. "Did you see Thompson's face when he realized?" One whispered. "I genuinely thought he might pass out right there in the hallway. I almost felt sorry for him." The other replied, "Almost. But man, the way he was yelling at her." "Chen's one of the toughest judges in this building. She doesn't tolerate disrespect from anyone." "Yeah, but she's fair," the first attorney added. "If Thompson's smart, he'll own up to what he did and learn from it. She respects people who can admit when they're wrong." Judge Chen pretended not to hear them, but their words echoed what she'd been thinking herself. This moment in Derek Thompson's career could go one of two ways. It could destroy him, leave him so humiliated and defensive that he'd never recover, or it could become a turning point, a hard lesson learned that would make him a better officer. Which path he took would depend largely on how he handled what came next. She glanced toward the back of the courtroom. Derek was still there, standing at attention like a soldier awaiting punishment. His eyes were fixed on her, and the expression on his face was one of pure misery. Good, she thought. Not because she enjoyed his suffering, but because that misery meant he understood the gravity of what he'd done. People who didn't feel bad about their mistakes rarely learned from them. The morning session continued. A woman fighting a restraining order violation. A man accused of writing bad checks. A complicated motion about expert witness testimony that had both attorneys citing case law back and forth for 20 minutes. Judge Chen handled each case with the same careful attention, asking questions, examining evidence, and making decisions based on facts and law rather than emotion. By the time the lunch recess rolled around, everyone in the courtroom had gotten a masterclass in how a good judge operates. She was firm but not cruel, thorough but not pedantic, and she treated everyone from experienced attorneys to scared first-time defendants with the same basic respect. The people who had witnessed the hallway incident were beginning to understand exactly why Derek's mistake was so significant. "We'll recess until 1:30, Judge Chen announced. "Please be on time." As people started filing out of the courtroom, she saw Derek move toward the exit with everyone else. "Officer Thompson," she called out. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. "I believe you have somewhere to be at 12:30. Derek stopped like he'd hit an invisible wall. "Yes, Your Honor, I remember. Chief Rodriguez's office. 2nd floor, East Wing. I'll meet you there." "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Chen watched him leave, noticing how his shoulders were slumped in a way that made him look much younger than he probably was. Patricia appeared at her side with a sandwich and a bottle of water. "You're going to be late for your meeting with Chief Rodriguez if you don't eat now." "I know," Judge Chen said, accepting the food gratefully. "How bad is the gossip getting?" Patricia made a face. "It's spreading like wildfire. Half the building has heard about it by now. The other half will know by end of day. And what are people saying? That depends on who you ask. Some people think you're going to destroy him. Others think you'll give him a second chance. A few are taking bets." Judge Chen shook her head but couldn't help smiling a little. "Of course they are. That's courthouses for you. More drama than a reality TV show. So what are you going to do?" Patricia asked quietly. Judge Chen took a bite of her sandwich and thought about it. She thought about Derek's red face in the hallway, his trembling hands in the courtroom, the way he'd grabbed her arm without even asking for identification first. But she also thought about what the older bailiff had said, that Derek had only been there 3 weeks, that he was young and eager, just over-eager, that everyone makes mistakes. "I'm going to have a conversation," she finally said. "A very serious conversation. And then we'll see what kind of man Officer Derek Thompson really is. Whether he's someone who can learn from his mistakes or whether he's someone who makes excuses for them." Patricia nodded, understanding. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." Judge Chen finished her sandwich quickly and headed for the door. It was 12:25. In 5 minutes, she'd be sitting across from Derek Thompson and Chief Rodriguez, and together they'd decide the young officer's fate. The question wasn't whether Derek had made a mistake. That part was obvious. The real question was what he'd do at this moment, this chance to either grow or to crumble, and Judge Victoria Chen was about to find out which way it would go. Chief Bailiff Rodriguez's office was smaller than most people expected for someone with her level of authority. The walls were covered with commendations, photos from various courthouse events, and a calendar that looked like it had more appointments than hours in the day. Behind her desk sat a woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen everything the justice system could throw at a person. When Judge Chen arrived at exactly 12:30, she found Derek Thompson already there, sitting ramrod straight in one of the 2 chairs facing the chief's desk. He looked like he was trying very hard not to fall apart. The older bailiff who had tried to help him that morning was standing in the corner, his arms crossed but his expression sympathetic. Chief Rodriguez stood when the judge entered. "Your Honor, thank you for making time for this." "Of course," Judge Chen said, taking the empty chair next to Derek. She could feel him tense up as she sat down, could practically hear his heart hammering in his chest. There was a moment of heavy silence. Chief Rodriguez looked at Derek with an expression that was hard to read. Disappointed maybe, tired definitely. She'd probably had to have this kind of conversation too many times over her career. "Officer Thompson," the chief began, "do you want to tell Judge Chen what you told me 15 minutes ago?" Derek swallowed hard. His hands were gripping his knees so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. When he spoke, his voice was shaky but determined. Your Honor, I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you more than that, but I don't know what more than an apology looks like in a situation like this. He took a breath and continued. This morning I was disrespectful to you. I grabbed your arm without cause. I made assumptions about who you were based on nothing but my own ego and inexperience. I spoke to you in a way that was completely inappropriate regardless of who you were. And I did all of this in front of witnesses, which means I didn't just disrespect you personally. I disrespected the entire court system. Judge Chen listened without interrupting, her face neutral. I've been thinking about it all morning, Derek went on, and now there was a crack in his voice. Watching you in court, seeing how you treated everyone with respect even when they didn't deserve it. That guy who could barely speak because he was so scared, you made him feel safe. Those two attorneys who were acting like children, you put them in their place without humiliating them. And I realized that everything I did wrong this morning, you showed me the right way to do it. He finally looked directly at Judge Chen, and she could see that his eyes were red. I don't have any excuse for what I did. I could say I'm new, or I was trained to be assertive, or I thought I was doing my job. But none of that matters because at the end of the day I was wrong. Completely, totally wrong. And I'm sorry. The office fell quiet again. The older bailiff shifted his weight, looking like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. Chief Rodriguez was watching Judge Chen carefully, probably trying to gauge her reaction. Judge Chen let the silence stretch out a little longer. Not to be cruel, but because she wanted Derek to sit with his words, to feel the weight of what he'd admitted. Finally she spoke. Officer Thompson, do you know why I didn't stop when you called out to me this morning? Derek shook his head. I've been working on a special investigation for the past 6 weeks. Fraud case, very complex, involving dozens of victims who lost their life savings. I've been reviewing evidence late into the night, trying to make sure that when this case goes to trial, justice is actually served. This morning I was running through testimony in my head, trying to connect pieces that weren't quite fitting together yet. She paused. That's not an excuse for not paying attention to my surroundings. But it's context. I was distracted, and when you grabbed my arm, my first thought wasn't, this officer is being aggressive. My first thought was, I must have really messed up somehow. Derek's face fell even further. Do you understand what I'm saying? Judge Chen asked. When someone in authority treats you badly, your immediate assumption is often that you've done something wrong. That's a huge amount of power to have over another person, and this morning you used that power poorly. I know, Derek whispered. I know I did. Chief Rodriguez leaned forward. Officer Thompson has an exemplary record from the academy. Top of his class in both academics and physical training. His instructors all noted his dedication and his desire to serve. This is his first position after graduation, and up until this morning he's been doing good work. The older bailiff finally spoke up. If I may, Your Honor, I've been watching Derek these past few weeks. He's eager, maybe too eager, but his heart's in the right place. What happened this morning was a failure of judgment, not a failure of character. Judge Chen turned to look at the bailiff. You think he deserves another chance? I think he deserves the opportunity to prove whether he's learned from this or not, the bailiff said carefully. But that's not my decision to make. All eyes turned back to Judge Chen. Derek looked like he was barely breathing, waiting for the verdict that would determine his future. Chief Rodriguez had her professional face on, but Judge Chen could tell she was hoping for mercy tempered with consequences. Officer Thompson, Judge Chen said slowly, I've spent 20 years in this justice system. I've seen people at their absolute worst and occasionally at their best. And one thing I've learned is that mistakes, even serious ones, don't have to define a person's entire career. What defines you is what you do after the mistake. She saw hope flicker in Derek's eyes, but she held up a hand. However, what happened this morning can't just be swept under the rug. You need to understand, really understand why it was wrong. Not just I shouldn't yell at judges, but the deeper issues. About bias, about assuming the worst of people, about using your authority as a weapon instead of a tool. Do you understand the difference? I think so, Derek said. But I'd like to understand it better. Good answer, Judge Chen said, and she saw Chief Rodriguez nod slightly in approval. Here's what's going to happen. You're not fired, but you are going to face consequences. She ticked them off on her fingers. First, you're going to undergo additional training on de-escalation techniques and proper credential verification. Not the standard training, but one-on-one sessions with experienced officers who can teach you the nuance that academy training sometimes misses. Derek nodded eagerly. Second, for the next 2 months, you're going to spend 1 day each week shadowing different courthouse personnel, bailiffs, clerks, other security officers who've been here for years. You're going to learn how this building actually works, who works here, and what proper courthouse protocol looks like. Yes, Your Honor. Third, you're going to write a detailed incident report about what happened this morning, but not just the facts. I want you to analyze your own behavior, what you were thinking, why you reacted the way you did, what you could have done differently, and I want you to research the psychological concept of implicit bias and how it affects law enforcement interactions. Derek was taking mental notes, his expression serious and focused. And finally, Judge Chen said, you're going to personally apologize to every single person who witnessed that incident this morning. Not because I'm making you, but because they deserve to know that's not how courthouse security is supposed to operate. There was a pause, and then Derek asked quietly, and after all that, what happens then? Judge Chen allowed herself a small smile. Then you get back to work. You become the officer that your academy instructors thought you could be. You learn from this and you become better because of it. Derek's eyes were definitely wet now, but he was smiling too. Thank you, Your Honor, I won't let you down. Don't thank me yet, Judge Chen said, standing up. You've got a lot of hard work ahead of you. Chief Rodriguez will set up your training schedule, and Officer Thompson, I'm going to be watching, not because I'm hoping you'll fail, but because I want to see you succeed. As Judge Chen left the office, she heard Chief Rodriguez already pulling up calendars and making plans for Derek's training. The older bailiff caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you," as she passed. Walking back to her chambers, Judge Chen thought about second chances and growth and the fine line between justice and mercy. She'd made her decision, and now only time would tell if it was the right one. 6 months later, the downtown courthouse looked exactly the same from the outside. Same marble columns, same security checkpoints, same steady stream of lawyers, defendants, and witnesses flowing through its doors every morning. But for Derek Thompson, everything was different. He stood at his usual post near the main entrance, but his posture had changed. He was still alert, still professional, but there was something softer in the way he watched people come through the doors. His eyes didn't immediately jump to suspicion anymore. He smiled at the regular attorneys, nodded respectfully to the judges, and helped confused visitors find their way to the right courtrooms. "Morning, Officer Thompson," called out one of the senior lawyers, a man who had witnessed that infamous incident 6 months ago. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," Derek replied warmly. "Courtroom 5 today, right?" "You've got a good memory," the lawyer said with an approving nod. Derek smiled. Memory had nothing to do with it. He'd learned to pay attention to the calendar, to know who had cases scheduled where. It made his job easier and helped people feel like the courthouse was a place where they were seen and valued, not just processed. The morning rush was starting to slow down when Derek noticed something that made him pause. Near the side entrance, a group of 3 young men were arguing loudly with another security officer. The officer, someone even newer than Derek had been 6 months ago, was getting red in the face, his hand moving toward his radio. Derek recognized the signs immediately. He'd been that officer once, ready to escalate instead of de-escalate, seeing threats instead of understanding context. He moved quickly but calmly toward the situation. "Hey, Travis," he said to the other officer. "Need a hand?" Travis looked relieved. "These guys are saying they're witnesses for a trial, but they don't have the right paperwork. They're supposed to check in at the clerk's office first, but they're refusing to leave the secure area." Derek turned to the 3 young men. They looked nervous, dressed in ill-fitting suits like they'd borrowed them for the occasion. One of them was clutching a crumpled piece of paper like it was a lifeline. "Gentlemen," Derek said, his voice calm and professional. "I'm Officer Thompson. I understand you're here as witnesses?" "Yeah, man," one of them said, his voice defensive. "We got subpoenas. We're supposed to be here." "I believe you," Derek said, and he could see them relax slightly at those 3 words. "Can I see your paperwork?" The young man with the crumpled paper handed it over. Derek read it quickly, then nodded. "Okay, you're definitely in the right place. Here's what happened. Witness check-in procedures changed about 2 months ago. You need to go to the 3rd floor, room 304. Check in there first and they'll give you badges and tell you where to wait. Takes about 5 minutes, and why didn't anyone tell us that? Another young man asked, frustrated but less angry now. That's a fair question, Derek admitted. The notification system isn't perfect, but I can walk you guys up there right now if you want. Make sure you get where you need to be. Travis looked surprised. The three young men looked at each other, then nodded. Yeah, okay. That'd be good. As Derek guided them toward the elevators, he heard one of them mutter, "See? I told you we weren't doing anything wrong. That other guy was just being aggressive for no reason." Derek didn't comment, but he made a mental note to talk to Travis later, not to get him in trouble, but to share what he'd learned over the past 6 months. Sometimes the best way to be a good security officer was to help people instead of interrogating them. After he got the witnesses checked in and directed to the right courtroom, Derek headed back downstairs. On his way through the second-floor corridor, he passed Judge Victoria Chen's courtroom. The door was open slightly, and he could hear her voice inside, patient and clear as she explained something to someone who clearly didn't understand legal terminology. He hadn't had much direct contact with her since that day. They'd exchanged polite nods when they passed each other, and once she'd stopped to ask him how his training was going. But mostly she'd kept her word about watching from a distance, letting him prove himself through his actions rather than hovering over him. "Thompson," the voice of the older bailiff called out from down the hall. "Got a minute?" Derek walked over. The bailiff, whose name was Robert, had become something of a mentor over these past months. "What's up?" "Chief Rodriguez wants to see you," Robert said. "Don't worry, it's not bad. At least I don't think it is." Derek felt a flutter of old anxiety but pushed it down. He'd learned that assuming the worst was rarely helpful. "When?" "Now if you can. I'll cover your post." The walk to Chief Rodriguez's office felt nothing like it had 6 months ago. Back then, Derek had been walking toward what he'd thought was the end of his career. Today, he was just curious. Chief Rodriguez was on the phone when he arrived, but she waved him in and pointed to a chair. He sat and waited, noticing a folder on her desk with his name on it. She hung up and turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Officer Thompson, how do you think these past 6 months have gone?" Derek considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I think I'm a completely different officer than I was. I've learned that security isn't just about catching people doing wrong things. It's about making the courthouse function smoothly, helping people navigate a system that's confusing to them, and knowing when to step in versus when to step back." Chief Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Robert tells me you handled a situation this morning with 3 witnesses who were lost." "Yes, ma'am. They just needed directions and some patience. He also tells me you've been mentoring some of our newer officers, sharing what you've learned." Derek felt heat rise in his cheeks. I remember what it was like to be new, and to think that being tough was the same as being good at your job. If I can help someone else avoid the mistakes I made, that seems worth doing." The chief picked up the folder with his name on it and opened it. "This is your 6-month review. Your supervisors have noted significant improvement in your judgment, your interpersonal skills, and your understanding of courthouse operations. Multiple staff members, including several judges, have specifically commended your professionalism." She looked up at him. "There's also a letter in here. From Judge Chen. She says that 6 months ago she gave you a chance to prove whether you'd learn from your mistake or be defined by it. She says you've proven yourself in ways that exceeded her expectations." Derek felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected that. "So here's where we are," Chief Rodriguez continued. "We have an opening for a senior courthouse security position. It comes with more responsibility, better pay, and you'd be helping train new officers when they start. Normally, we wouldn't consider someone with only 9 months of experience, but these aren't normal circumstances." She closed the folder. "I'm offering you the position. Not because I feel sorry for you or because Judge Chen wrote a nice letter. I'm offering it because you've earned it. You took one of the worst possible starts to a career and turned it into a foundation for growth. That's exactly the kind of person we need in a leadership role." Derek sat there stunned. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes or say no," Chief Rodriguez said with a slight smile. "But say it soon. I have paperwork to file." "Yes," Derek said immediately. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you." As Derek left the office, he felt like he was floating. He made his way back to his post where Robert was waiting with a knowing grin. "So?" "Senior position," Derek said, still processing it. "Starting next month." "Called it," Robert said, clapping him on the shoulder. You've come a long way, kid. That afternoon, as Derek was finishing his shift, he saw Judge Chen walking toward the exit. She had her briefcase in one hand and was talking on her phone, looking tired but satisfied with her day. She noticed him and ended her call. "Officer Thompson," she said, stopping in front of him. "I heard about your promotion. Congratulations." "Thank you, Your Honor," Derek said. "And thank you for the letter you wrote. Chief Rodriguez told me about it." Judge Chen waved a hand dismissively. "I only wrote what was true. You did the hard work." There was a moment of silence, and Derek knew he might not get another chance to say what he needed to say. "Your Honor, I know I apologized 6 months ago, but I want you to know that I think about that morning every single day. Not because I'm still beating myself up about it, but because it taught me something crucial about who I want to be. You could have ended my career. Instead, you gave me the tools to build a better one. I'll never forget that." Judge Chen looked at him thoughtfully. "Derek, can I tell you something? When I was a young attorney fresh out of law school, I lost my temper with a judge in open court. I thought I was standing up for my client, but really, I was just being arrogant and disrespectful. That judge could have had me sanctioned, could have damaged my reputation before my career even started. Instead, he called me into his chambers and talked to me about the difference between passion and professionalism." She smiled at the memory. "He told me that the measure of a good lawyer wasn't never making mistakes. It was learning from them. I've tried to pass that lesson forward whenever I can." Derek felt something shift in his understanding. Judge Chen hadn't just been being merciful that day. She'd been paying forward a kindness that someone had shown her years ago. "We all need someone to believe in us when we mess up," Judge Chen continued. "You just happened to mess up in a very public, very dramatic way. But you owned it, you learned from it, and you became better. That's all anyone can ask." She started to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Derek? Keep mentoring those new officers. The best teachers are the ones who remember what it was like to be lost." As Judge Chen walked out into the afternoon sun, Derek stood at his post with a profound sense of gratitude. 6 months ago, this job had nearly destroyed him. Today, it was the foundation of a career he was proud of. And it all came down to one simple truth. Everyone deserves a second chance, but what you do with that chance is entirely up to you. Derek had made his choice. And as he greeted the evening shift officers and prepared to head home, he knew he'd made the right one.